From the campus of Yale University, this is Business Talk with Jim Campbell, syndicating across the country on the Business Talk Radio Network and coming to you from our flagship stations, Yale Radio, WYBC.com, and 1490 AM WGCH, Greenwich, Connecticut. All talk and all business, 60 minutes of radio with leading figures from the world of business, along with the business of politics and sports. Is the iconic American company IBM in permanent and fatal decline? Has IBM forsaken the values and culture that made it great for short-term financial engineering? Can IBM be fixed? Today on Business Talk with Jim Campbell, Peter Greilich spent 30 years as an IBMer, going from sales to brand manager to worldwide market manager. He's interviewed thousands of IBMers across the globe with his ongoing fascination in the company. His book, A View Beneath the Elephant, Rediscovering IBM's Corporate Constitution. I'm happy to have him on board today. He's a consummate IBMer, and when I first tried to get him on in the beginning of January, he said, "No, Jim, that's the week I do my goals." Very IBM. I guess before we start off, tell folks what the symbolism or the meaning or importance of Beneath the Elephant is.
Yeah, Jim, gladly, and thanks for inviting me. It's a wonderful opportunity. So Lou Gerstner wrote his book back in 2002, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? This is intended to be, to Gerstner's yang, this is the yin. It's that counterbalancing force, that view from beneath, to maybe provide a balance to his perspective. And it's really the perspective of what I refer to as IBMers or IBM employee owners.
All right, we'll go beneath the elephant then. Right off the bat, we've been all this talk of IBM's roadmap, and a lot of people calling it a death march. What do you believe the condition is of IBM right now, and how disengaged do you believe the workforce is?
Well, that's one of the purposes of my book, is to kind of document exactly what's going on within IBM. Because I was there for 30 years, I wrote a lot of stories about the resource actions and the impact that it's having on the people. If you take a look at data like from Gallup, where they talk about an engaged employee, or Deloitte talks about a passionate employee, IBMers are basically not engaged and not passionate today, and that's causing an impact on earnings per share.
IBM known obviously for its basic beliefs, respect, service, excellent. You write in the book, the basic beliefs no longer unite the generation of IBMers. This is this century's most significant change. What do you mean exactly?
Well, if you go back, and Jim, I retired in 2011. I spent the last 3 years researching Watson Sr. and Jr., and I really also did some reading with Peter F. Drucker, and he talked about a constitution. It's that way of defining a belief system within your organization that it allows you to manage it and keep it under control, to keep authoritarianism under control and not let anarchy reign. And if you go back to Watson Sr., he had three concepts that he just hammered on all the time to all IBMers, and including his competitors. Said you need to have democracy in business. We are all assistants as managers, and in this company we forgive thoughtful mistakes. And Watson Jr. took those and basically came up with the three basic beliefs that almost every IBMer knows, that goes back to a previous generation: respect for the individual, service to the customer, and a pursuit of excellence.
How exactly has IBM changed?
Well, fundamentally, it's lost that value system. Probably in the 1990s was a change that I talk about in my book called the Watershed event. We had seen as IBM employees, employee owners, going into the 1990s, IBM hit a point that everybody talks about with Lou Gerstner coming in. The company was cash poor, but still culture rich. Lou Gerstner came in, and he did all the right things initially. Understanding that we were cash poor, he had to fix the cash situation, and he hit the right tone to get our culture working again. He talked about the customer first. He talked about one IBM and stop the breakup of the company. And he articulated a strategy that was very familiar to us of uniting services, hardware, and software. And the culture took off. There is no other way to explain it when you can say that 40% fewer people start to drive 25, 30, and 40% more revenue in less than a year after he takes over. After that, in the 1990s, we started to see Gerstner started transition. And in his book, he says, look, I saved the company financially, and I agree with that 100%. He was the right leader at the right time. But he even admitted in his book, who says elephants can't dance, that his strength was finances and strategy, and that he wasn't a man that understood culture. And in fact, I would say he didn't understand human nature, because he started to make some decisions that really showed up to every IBMer that, we weren't IBMers anymore. We were just employees of a corporation.
Very well said. Let me ask you this, then. Now, recently, it's as if the company, as if we have a tech company acting as a financial engineer, which is sort of an oxymoron. They've bought $105 billion of stock back, $100 billion borrowed against that, which makes no sense to me. The shares are down. The number of shares are down, but that's caused 45% of the EPS growth. Revenues are down from over 110 billion down to 90 billion. They've cut the percentage of R&D. What is the thinking behind this? It doesn't even make sense for a tech firm to be doing this.
Well, IBM's on a strategy of doing share buybacks, and I think you have to have a balanced perspective on that. I write for Seeking Alpha. I focus on culture, but I also take a lot of feedback from, the CPAs, the financial analysts out there. There's a time when you want to do share buybacks, and that's if you really believe in the company, you believe it's, heading straight and forward, and that the market isn't appreciating it. There's a good reason there to start buying back your shares, and multiple companies have done that very successfully. The problem is that you also have to evaluate as a corporation where you're going to spend your dollars. And I come up with some different numbers, Jim. I've come up with IBM spending $156 billion on its paper since 2000, the 21st century. The number you gave out is actually taking dollars out for selling the PC company, for selling the server division and things like that. They've actually spent $156 billion since 2000 on their own paper. An interesting fact, if you want me to go there a little bit, is that is actually from a percentage of net income equivalent to the $5 billion that they spent in 1964 on the mainframe. And I think that's
from an investment
when you say,
from an investment perspective in constant dollars. By the way, that point is interesting too, because David Stockman, who I interviewed, talking about something else, but about corporations. Basically financial engineering, that IBM's actual investment in technology, in R&D, is in real terms down.
Right. Well, once again, I always try to find the balance and perspectives when you're looking at things. And R&D may be down, but you also have to consider, and we've had long conversations with this beneath the elephant. I mean, a lot of guys sitting around drinking beers and saying, what's going on? I mean, IBM is on an acquisitions path. And that's perfectly fine. But if you think of, acquisitions as actually an extension of R&D,
right.
It can be very smart. Because
they've outsourced their R&D, basically.
Right.
That's what it says.
I mean, and the bottom line is that, you let a bunch of smart guys get out there, fight it out, duke it out, and then you pick out the best of the bunch and acquire them. One fact, though, I talked to a development manager that I trust very much. He's now teaching for a university. I gave him a call up and asked him, when does an acquisition strategy go wrong? And he said, Pete, it goes wrong when you start buying companies in your core competency. When you've neglected, those different software products, those different market shares, or, those different markets that you're historically strong in, and start having to acquire companies there.
That's very
interesting.
And
in my book, I talk about the story of Tivoli Configuration Manager, which was a market-leading product that actually, just didn't get the investment that it needed, was ignored, and then IBM basically spent more to recover in that market space than they actually spent for the whole Tivoli organization, and that's on one Tivoli product.
Yeah, it seems it's penny wise and pound foolish. The long-term growth rate over the last 20 years also stunned me. It's 2% below the rate of inflation. We're down to the last 30 or 40 seconds in this segment. IBM's culture has always allowed it to reinvent itself. Are you confident that they can do that this time?
I think with the right leadership, they can.
So you still think there's going to be a strong future for IBM?
Oh, I'm ever optimistic, Jim, ever optimistic.
Business Talk with Jim Campbell, coming to you on the BizTalk Radio Network, over 300 stations across the country, and you can go to biztalkradio.com to find the station closest to you to listen over the Internet or to access our archive of podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Campbell BizTalk, Campbell B-I-Z Talk. We'll be right back. Next, we're going to look at the historic IBM, looking back a little bit. We're talking with ex-IBMer and defender of the old IBM values, Peter Greilich. This segment, we're going to go inside IBM's basic beliefs in culture. And going back to T.J. Watson, the original Watson, and interestingly, in your book, you put the compound growth rate of the stock under each of these CEOs. His was 17%. Interesting that, first off, you think IBM's ethics focus came from the fact that he was under indictment at NCR when he came over? And the second part of it with the older Watson is he was very adamant that he was not going to manage the company by the stock price, which seems the opposite of where we are now.
I spent 3 years studying Watson Sr. and just trying to drill down to understand the man. When you read the books that are out there, you really get a lot of different information. I actually went back and read the newspapers and read the articles and read his speeches. And first of all, I think he was absolutely adamant after what he went through with the NCR situation and the antitrust suit that, you know, he was not going to allow his company to ever face that kind of a situation again. I also cover in my book how he talked about the fact that he knew that he couldn't visit every one of his customers. And he needed the internal character of his organization to reflect outward. And the only way you can do that is that if you really enforce on your salesmen a set of standards that are inviolate. You just can't violate them or you're going to get fired. And that's the IBM I joined. There, you had a lot of flexibility. You could be omnipotent in everything you did, but you did not violate these basic beliefs because they were, you know, the kind of basic values that every company ought to have. You know, respect for the individual when you have discussions about problems internally. You always ask the question of what's in the best interest of the customer. You focus on service. And then you always ask, are we on the best path, that pursuit of excellence? So, you know, to kind of answer your first question, I think Watson Sr. definitely had come as close to death as a person could in a business life, and he wasn't going to let his company come that close. Does that make sense, Jim? Yeah, it does. Very interesting. Thomas Watson Jr. now, he actually had a 21% compound growth rate in the stock price under him, which I'm a big Buffett man, is exactly what Buffett's done, so it's pretty impressive. You say that he saved the company from authoritarianism, and, of course, he's the underlying guy that pushed management contention. Talk about that. Yeah, so it's interesting, and I'm still forming some ideas here to, you know, start presenting on and doing some public speaking on. But Watson Sr. was really a classic human being with greatness and flaws. But the way I like to describe it is that he believed in the 3 layers of management, or a three-layered organization. And actually, since you're at Yale, the Yale economists did a great study during right during World War II, trying to understand how IBM could grow so quickly and so fast with high employee morale. And it came down to Watson Sr.'s belief in a 3-layer system: management, manager, and employee. And he basically believed that you empowered the employee, empowered the immediate manager, and everybody else was extraneous. And when you read books like Think, The Watson Dynasty, that are really negative on Watson's authoritarianism and the way he would go after his people, it was really he was going after his middle management, those guys that didn't get it. I've heard stories. I've talked to one gentleman who was a branch manager in Roanoke in the 40s, and Watson Sr. showed up and said, "What's going on here?" And he wrote down all the problems. And before the day of cell phones, right? I mean, you just didn't have a cell phone in your car. Within an hour after he told him, Watson Sr. had called his manager and was reading him the riot act on what was keeping sales from going up. So, yes, very authoritarian, but very authoritarian to his middle management, and he perceived that he was always there to remove roadblocks from his salesmen so that they could sell. Does that make sense, Jim?
Yeah, in fact, on Watson Jr., the management contention system, to me, that was kind of to put in place to balance the fact that IBM had a monopoly, so the competition he generated from the inside. The trouble is when competition came, IBM was too bundled up competing inside through all of its fiefdoms, right?
Well, I think that's possibly true. I think those fiefdoms actually came in after Watson Jr. left. During Watson Jr.'s, if you look at the evolution, Watson Sr.
Oh yeah, they definitely
like
came in. They definitely came in after. The management contention system worked perfectly under him because they had a monopoly.
And that's where the basic beliefs to me come into play, because you can have a contention management system as long as you have respect. So when you gather 10 people in a room, you want to have the best discussion. You want to have everything on the table. You want to let your hair down and have arguments if you have to have it. Let the flowers bloom. But as long as you have respect in that room, you'll arrive at the right decision. And when you start to lose respect between the individuals in that room and you start to have CEOs that don't enforce respect for the individual on those kind of discussions and don't model it, then you start to have problems with getting feedback. You start people building fiefdoms and, watching their backs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let's move into beginning of legacy of failures. And I'm going to start with John Opel, which was surprising because he had a 17% compound growth rate and was very successful. But I think he set in place some real bad stuff. And one of them is, having fire sales on the lease inventory, right, which spikes profit, but is not basically taking profits from the future. And one of the things that I don't believe he was ever held fully accountable for was he built the company's future on a strategic plan that was going to be at $100 billion 40 years ago. He missed a revenue plan by $40 billion and 40 years.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things I documented very well in my book. I actually got out the charts to show the spike in revenue. John R. Opel, in 1984, before he exited the business, said we're going to be a $100 billion IBM by 1990. And the piece that most people still forget is he said we're going to be a $180 billion IBM by 1994.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that part.
Yeah, well, and he invested like that, too. So you have John Akers walking in the door, taking over, and there's a lot of similarities today with Ginny Rometty. I mean, what do you do? The market's been promised $100 billion, $180 billion. I was hired in 1980 on that belief that it was going to take off, so I can't complain much, right? But the bottom line is that John Opel set up John Akers, and John Akers, God bless John Akers. I mean, he really tried. He took cuts. He tried to maintain everything. But as I say in my book, he lost faith in the IBM people to come through in the end.
In fact, I think that's a great point that, in a sense, Ginny Rometty is the victim of Sam Palmisano's success, just as Akers was of Opel's seeming short-term success. And in fact, getting down to the last minute, you say Akers saying too many employees are standing around the water coolers as if there were too many folks and not enough action. And you said that was a killer statement?
Oh, yeah. That set up Lou Gerstner to come in and take over. When that hit the press, we in the branch offices, we weren't sitting around. We were trying to preserve the company. We were driving revenue as hard as we could. We were calling on customers. We hadn't lost our customer focus out in the field. I was in Austin, Texas, selling AS400, System 36s and 38s, and we were going after it. And to hear your CEO suddenly say, hey, we're going to break up the company, you guys are standing around water coolers, put a check mark by what you did for IBM today, really took the heart out of all of us, and no wonder the revenue flattened out and we started to have problems.
Business Talk with Jim Campbell can be heard on the Business Talk Radio Network, Sundays 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, then again Sundays 10 to 11 p.m. Eastern. Go to biztalkradio.com, find the station nearest to you. Coming next, Not Your Father's IBM. We're talking with Peter Greilich. He's the author of a book, A View from Beneath the Dancing Elephant, Rediscovering IBM's Corporate Constitution. We're going to talk now about the fundamental changes in IBM. Start with Gerstner, who, by the way, his compound growth rate was 29%. It's coming off a very low base, but that's still impressive. IBM was near bankruptcy, in fact, when he came on board. The first thing I want to ask you is, he made a gut decision on the spot almost not to break the company up. Akers was going to break it into as many as 500 pieces. Where do you think Gerstner got that gut feel to make such a radical reversal?
Well, and I think he talked to customers, and he found out that the value that IBM has is being a solutions provider to your customer. Yeah. And that means that you can't have a strategy like IBM has today where you're looking for the properly balanced, profit-driven product portfolio, right? You just cherry-pick your products because customers are out there and they have Intel servers, they have mainframes, they have all this networking, products. I think he talked to the customers and they just said, look, you got to help me manage this whole environment and keep it under control. And I think he realized that, at that time, I don't think he had a shareholder-first perspective because at the time, everybody was writing, break IBM up, sell all the piece parts, and you'll drive more revenue for the shareholders. So I think his perspective in 1993 was right on. The messages he hit, like I said before, tied into IBM's culture of customer first, one IBM, and staying together as a services, hardware, and software organization. And when he did that, our culture took off. I mean, it was like Akers had been a damper on everything, and suddenly Lou came in and said, man, we're going to have some layoffs, we're going to have a bad year, but by God, we're getting back to putting the customer first. And to me, that's what drove, every strategy he had, and I praise him for that.
It's one of, to me, the all-time great strategic decisions. He didn't know IBM then. He went with his gut, and he went with the customer. Now, you made a very interesting point, which is that the elephant danced because Gerstner tapped into a culture that he didn't even understand. So I want you to talk about that, and the other piece of that is, you hear Gerstner from his perspective, he's coming on saying, you know what, we have to attack the culture in some ways because the IBMers feel they're entitled. They're entitled to lifetime employment. They're entitled to all these things that are no longer realistic. So talk about how he tapped into a culture he didn't understand and ended up sort of destroying it in the end.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like having a football coach come on board and saying, "Hey guys, we got to pull together as a team. We're not going to win here for a bunch of individuals, running every which direction. We can't have our franchise player. We've got to have a front line that blocks." That's a standard, pep talk that anybody would give to an organization that you're trying to pull together. And he gave that pep talk, and by God, the culture that was still out there was fired up. We had believed for 80 years in the customer first. That was our culture. Service, and not just service, but true service, right? Doing what's best for the customer. When he stood on stage, I got chills up my back because I went, yes, he finally gets it. And in contrast to John Akers, who, was making tremendous cuts, I think he was doing some of the right things financially. He lost his faith in us, and it was evident from day one. So when Lou took over and took the mantle, I think we all knew he had to make some tough cash decisions, and we expected those. We're businessmen. If there's anything an IBMer is they're all businessmen. So we understand tough times, and somebody could have said, I was told forever, full employment as long as you have great performance, but we all knew in the back of our heads that economic times could get so bad that might not happen. So I understood for the first 3 years what he was doing, what he was going through. I stood up in front of customers and said, Lou Gerstner is one of the greatest CEOs we've ever had.
So now explain what do you mean by he ended up basically tackling that sense of entitlement and what that did to the culture.
Well, I think what happens is, and this isn't an attack on Lou Gerstner because you could have the same thing of Watson Sr., Watson Jr. We're all human beings. We have blind sides. None of us are perfect. If there was a contrast that he didn't fit with the culture of IBM was that he was aloof, he was arrogant, and he was unapproachable. Watson Sr. was anything but those. He was not aloof. He was a man of the people. He walked amongst the people. I document in my book how in 1948 he shook the hands of 20% of the IBMers in the world before going to the shareholder meeting. As much as people would like to think he was arrogant, he wasn't. He constantly gave praise to the IBMers that were out there. And the only way he wouldn't be unapproachable was that he was too approachable. His schedule was too filled up. He would take employees that would just show up and knock on his door. So he was the antithesis of a CEO that we had been used to. We were used to CEOs that were approachable, that were humble, and that were part of us and stayed and explained things to us and became part of us. And somewhere along the line, a shareholder-first strategy showed up, and that's what set up July of 1999, what I call the Watershed event. You know, it was to us and to me, who was a diehard IBMer, it was the first time I really got it. I mean, the shareholders are coming first, and I'm just an employee number now.
And are you getting it to where they made fundamental decisions like to go from defined benefit to defined contribution, and really take away things that the employees thought that they had for life? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't so much that the pension plan was changed. It was a lack of understanding on his part on human nature. I don't think he anticipated that, IBMers are some of the sharpest people on the face of the planet when you take a look at it. And he didn't give a choice in plans. In my book, I talk about, how I was looking for a choice and that I would have taken, the change in the plans because I didn't think I was going to survive at IBM another year. But when he didn't offer us a choice, it set off a firestorm within the company. And bottom line, I think it was a strategic error on his part because he couldn't understand human nature that, we just wanted a choice. And I think if he'd given us a choice, he probably would have put more money into the IBM coffers and not had the problems that he had, the uprising by IBMers in the United States.
Interestingly, so the savings of $3 billion from the pension, money put into the pension, is actually like almost half of the incremental profits that he delivered to IBM.
That's right. I mean,
that's on the backs of employees.
Plan, and IBM wasn't the only one doing this. There's a fabulous book out there by Ellen Schultz on retirement heist, where she gets into the nitty-gritty of it. And I basically reference it in my book and say, if you really want education on how the corporations in America tap the pension plans, that's the primer, and I'd highly recommend it.
So let me ask you this: from a Wall Street-driven world that we live in, is there any options for these kinds of tough decisions that look like they're breaking employee bonds? I mean, did IBM have any choice in the long run?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, maintaining a culture isn't expensive. I mean, everybody seems to think that culture is about raises and about money and about more benefits. Culture, human nature since 1914 hasn't really changed that much. IBM has consistently paid, up to that point of Maslow's theory where I make enough money that I'm okay. And now all these other factors kick in. I want to be self-initiated. I want to be able to grow. I want to be able to change jobs and not feel like I'm stuck somewhere. And the Watsons understood that basic fundamental drive of human nature, that it wasn't money. IBM has never, and as long as I've ever been around, ever paid top dollar compared to other corporations out there. They talked about longevity. They talked about not laying people off. They talked about rewarding you for your performance and seeing a direct correlation between pay and performance. And that's what fired up IBMers. I mean, that's what created an IBM employee owner. And when I talk about an employee owner, I talk about employees that make decisions as if they owned the business or they carried the burden of the owner. And that's what an IBMer was. Every day they'd make decisions as if the business was theirs. And that's what defined an IBMer.
Interesting. As we get to the last minute, has all of these resource actions and reductions in headcounts and all this stuff, what has it done to the front office, to the sales engine of the company?
Oh, it's devastating. LinkedIn is a fabulous tool because you see people movements, and I've seen some of the best systems engineers that are standing in front of customers leaving IBM in the last 6 months. People that were on tracks to become distinguished engineers within IBM going to business partners. So, you just can only take it so often. I cover in my book January of 2009 when 17,000 IBMers were cut and how horrible that day was. The morale takes a big hit, Jim, that can't be recovered.
Maybe we'll talk about that in the final overtime segment, just what that fear has done to the company. Now you can get the best
absolutely. That'd be a great topic to take on because there's a lot of data to say that you're actually impacting earnings per share by having employees full of fear.
Okay, in our final national segment, can Greilich fix IBM? And we've been looking under the dancing elephant of IBM with Peter Greilich, and we're going to try and look at what you do now. And we're in a hyper-competitive world. IBM no longer has a monopoly, so we have to give management the benefit of the doubt that they're not stupid and would seek to destroy their own culture. So let's explore that a little bit. First off, how do you think IBM could rediscover its corporate constitution, as you say?
That's a good question, Jim. I think part of that would be to go back and understand, where IBM was 100 years ago and look for any similarities and then see how to dig themselves out. The similarities between 1914 when Watson Sr. took over and today are eerily familiar. In 1914, he had Watson Sr. had three organizations he was trying to keep his hands around. Happened to be CTR, the computing scale, the tabulating, and the time recording, and trying to put them together into a coherent strategy. Today, there's software, hardware, and services. So there's three organizations that can infight between themselves, trying to drive the most revenue, trying to keep from resourcing people. In 1914, Watson Sr. says, "I found very little enthusiasm," and that pretty much describes IBM of today as the enthusiasm to show up for work every day. What IBM really needs, in my humble opinion, is a leadership style. If Jenny stays around, she just has to change her style of leadership, or they need new leadership that can make 400,000 employees wake up every day and be engaged, passionate, and enthusiastic. That isn't as easy as a financial statement. That takes a leader that goes and talks to the employees, that gives them a strategy of where they're going. The difference is that today, and the reason I truly believe that IBM has a chance is it's the reverse of what Lou Gerstner walked into. Lou Gerstner couldn't save today's IBM. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Because instead of cash poor and culture rich, today's organization is culture poor and cash rich. The cash can carry it, but they have to fix the culture.
Interesting. And so Lou would not be successful in this era. I don't know if you can name somebody who would be, but what exactly, if we get a little bit under the hood, would somebody have to do? What do you have to do to re-engage 460,000 employees? I mean, you have to put different programs in, different incentives, different leadership.
Right. Well, the first thing is that because Lou he didn't realize he had this culture out there, but it was there. It was a culture where we as IBMers believed the CEO's words. If the CEO said, "I'm going to keep IBM together," we believed the words because the culture had trained us to have belief in other IBMers. That has been destroyed. So whatever leadership takes over, whether it's Jenny changing, her style or bringing in a new leadership, words will not serve the purpose. For a decade and a half, through the end of Lou Gerstner's leadership, all through Sam Palmisano's, there's been words and no actions, and the actions have been negative actions. One that I could suggest that would just suddenly say we're at a change is not, dropping the roadmap, but Jenny, when she first took over, put in change the 401k to where you don't get your matching funds until December. That doesn't cost IBM a heck of a lot of money. Just reverse that decision and say, I am now ready to take off. I'm going to start acknowledging that we need our employees to be engaged, passionate, and enthusiastic, and here's my offering. Let's get to work. Does that make sense?
You have an interesting chart in your book talking about fixing the sales culture, that IBM productivity is actually down 18% between 2004 and 2013. And again, this is going against the financial engineering, which is showing profits going up because there's less shares. But that's a pretty serious issue, isn't it?
Well, I think so. Its revenue per employee is now, significantly double digits lower than it was, 14, 15 years ago. What that says is that IBM's been investing in its paper. It hasn't been investing in its processes. Sam Palmisano took the low-hanging fruit. He resourced Europeans and Americans and hired people in India. Now you've got a real problem because, how am I going to stay ahead? I can't keep resourcing people and replacing them. I have to fix the processes. And that's what revenue per employee is all about, driving more revenue with fewer employees, not with more. The headcount at IBM today is as large as it's ever been for less revenue.
In fact, it scared me. The HP's, which has been considered a disastrously run firm, has a much higher revenue per employee now than IBM. Let me ask you on the financial engineering side, how about some options that would maybe take the heat off the Wall Street side of things? Should IBM consider going private? Should it consider selling itself to Berkshire Hathaway since Buffett's a big guy, a big investor in them? Should they break themselves up?
Jim, I've learned in dealing with customers that there's sometimes that you just should say, I don't know. I don't have any suggestions in that area. I love IBM. I think IBM is an iconic American corporation. Our greatest fear in the 90s is that someone would buy us and take our independence away. We were fighting like crazy to maintain our independence. It would kill me to see somebody buy IBM out. I would like to see it work through this one more time and put another check mark by the IBM name saying we made it one more time. Actually,
Berkshire Hathaway would let IBM do whatever it wanted to do without the quarterly pressures. I think Berkshire would be one place that would be a nice haven. It's hard to see IBM disappearing into some corporation. And, GE considered buying IBM when it was near bankruptcy at $33 a share.
Somehow or other, they have to overcome the short-term perspective.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that, I've heard Kringley talk quite a few times. I've read his book, and, one of the things he talks about is that you get what you incent, right? That, you pay
exactly.
Pay the CEO a bunch of money, and by God, you're going to get somebody going after a bunch of money. I tend to disagree with that. I think we need CEOs in positions of leadership that believe in right over might, that believe in doing the right thing for the company, whether it impacts them financially or not. And I think we're putting the wrong people in positions of leadership that look for, the quarterly dollar or, their retirement check. I understand that, but they're so high up there, they're going to get a retirement check of some kind. But we need the right people that look in, and Watson Sr. was the epitome of that. He was getting 5% of everything after paying $6 per share dividend, and he gave that up. He dropped it to 2.5%. He dropped it to 0.5% to build an IBM retirement plan, and he did that because of it. He was a CEO that knew he needed a team behind him.
And that's,
I think our CEOs today that we're putting into positions don't understand that they need 400,000 people to wake up every morning, and sometimes just something as simple as saying we're on a different path and acting differently makes a difference.
All right, well said. As you said, the future lies in rediscovering their Constitution. You say in the book, a man is known by the company he keeps, a company is known by the men it keeps. That's T.J. Watson. Peter Greilich, the book is A View from the Dancing Elephant, Rediscovering IBM's Corporate Constitution. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Sunday. You're listening to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. This is Segment 5 Overtime exclusively for Yale Radio, WYBC. Thanks to Peter Greilich for staying with us on Overtime. And I think I want to go into one thing first. I think the world, the IBM world externally, IBM is so cloistered internally that I don't, and the cuts there over these last unlimited number of years has been death by 1,000 cuts, and they call them resource actions or RAs. Try and give us a sense of what the palpable fear is like when you've got to work with customers and at the same time you're seeing your buddies shot left and right, you're worried about yourself going. Give us a sense of how management has handled this and this culture of fear that's pervasive.
Boy, so let me put everything back, I guess, into a historical context, and because that's kind of what I try to do. And I think Jim Collins probably captures what's going on at IBM. He talks about a rigorous company and a ruthless company in his writings. And he basically says in a rigorous company, your best people never worry about their jobs because they need to stay at work, mentally, physically. Watson Sr. said, people don't do their best work if they're constantly worrying about a paycheck from day to day, which gave rise to his concept of trying to keep IBM as fully employed as he could. Today, IBM has become ruthless, and that's by Jim Collins' definition. When resource actions come, and I document January of 2009, which was one of the worst resource actions I saw in my IBM career, and it actually set me on the path to retire. We knew that IBM wouldn't publicize how many are coming, but the whisper number was that there was 17,000 cuts coming. Prior to that, my appraisal had been dropped for no reason. And in fact, every appraisal on our team was dropped. And this is a side note that shows that HR, human resources, is just an extension of finance. Finance says, here's a number we need to hit, and human resources says, here's the number of people we have to cut, and those numbers are just passed out, and you don't know if your name's on that list or not. You could be a top-notch employee and be in the wrong place at the wrong time and be gone. And I came within 2 days of being on one of those lists and being gone. So is management handling it? I think management's doing the best they can. First-line management's doing the best they can within a bad situation. And this bad situation is set up because IBM is a financially run company that has numbers to meet quarterly. And they're going to do it by cutting people. That's IBM's number one cost of doing business, right? So cut people.
That was very.
Did I answer your question, Jim?
Yeah, it was very well put, because I was trying to get for people to understand what this is like, and it shatters the bond, right?
Oh, absolutely. When I go through it was hard. I cried writing the chapter on the January of 2009 because of all the good friends I lost, but also the fear, the anxiety that was in there, the calls that I got, the same times or instant messages that came in and hit. At the end of the day, I talk about just laying my head down and going, I'm so glad this day is over. But it continued for a month because, people had 30 days. Some people cried. Some people looked at it and said, hey, it's a new beginning. I'm taking off. I refer to it as a wake for 30 days because some people celebrated, some people didn't. And it was hard because you became a survivor and you suffered survivor's syndrome. And then how do you go call on a customer after that?
Wow. Now, you said at the end of the first segment that absolutely IBM can reinvent itself. It always has. It's always come back, sometimes from near deaths. Now, put that with what you've just said about the destruction of the culture and how they're now culture poor, even if they're cash rich. So how does it reinvent itself now if it's shot its culture?
It has to rebuild it. I go back, I'm an optimistic person, and I say absolutely IBM can recover. It needs the right leadership to make that happen. In 1914, it was three companies slammed together. People were not enthusiastic. There was open warfare between the scales division, the recording division, or the time division, and the tabulating. Watson Sr. walked in there as a leader and said, we're one company. We're moving forward, and let me tell you that you compete honestly and fairly, and I will take care of you. The problem with fixing a culture is that it's not as easy as Lou Gerstner's 1 year turnaround of cut 30,000 people and move on. It's going to take a different style of leader that understands human nature, that understands that people are motivated by more than just a paycheck. It's important. We all know that, right? But when you get the caliber and the quality of people that you have at IBM, it's about more than a paycheck. It's about seeing your creation move through the product portfolio and solve customer problems. It's about standing in front of customers, the largest banks in the world, and saying, I've got a solution for your problem, and I'm the one that can make those decisions. And nobody's allowing those people to make those decisions anymore at IBM. So that leadership has to change, first of all. Secondly, HR has to change. HR needs to read Gallup's paper about engaged employees that shows about how earnings per share shoot up in companies that have engaged employees. Deloitte talks about passionate employees. So they really need to make a change in their human. We talked about one of the things that Rometty could do, rename human resources human relations. When Watson Sr. founded it back in the early 50s and put a woman in charge of it, it was about human relations. Today, human resources, exactly what people feel like. Stand up in front of the world and say, I'm renaming our organization Human Relations, and if you don't see them standing up for you and working on relations that make you engaged, passionate, and enthusiastic, then call me.
That's well said as well, which reminded me of something. In the older days, and I don't know through when, they did employee surveys all the time. And in your book, you document how much they've declined over time. But does IBM even do them honestly anymore?
Well, that's some of the things I've written about on Seeking Alpha, is that's one of the legacies of Sam Palmisano that nobody's bothered to talk about. Prior to 2009, IBM documented feedback from employees in their annual reports or in their responsibility reports. They also documented customer feedback. That has stopped in 2009 and 2011, and I think it's because, why raise the question? If the reports are getting so bad and people are ignoring them, the other thing to do is just stand up and say, we've got a problem here and we need to fix it. It's kind of like the old, if you have a problem, you have to admit it, and then you can get on with it and fix it.
That's what I have this big problem that IBM senior management just has huge denial. Because so they don't want to hear the bad news, so they just stopped getting it. But sometime it's gonna come back to bite them. It's gonna bite them in the butt. Let me ask you about Ginny Rometty. She was obviously there when you were still there in 2011. I don't know what was the feeling about her internally. Is she the right person? Does she have enough vision for this job?
Jim, once again, I'm going to say that's an area that I'm going to not have an opinion on. I retired in 2011 with Sam Palmisano. Turned over the reins to Ginny. I've talked to people. I've gotten different opinions. In my articles I've written in Seeking Alpha, I've gone what I consider pretty easy on her. The bottom line is that Ginny has 3 years now as CEO. Mm-hmm. If she can change her leadership style, I would rather see her change her leadership style and acknowledge that she needs 400,000 employees helping her and guiding her forward than to have to start all over again looking for another CEO. Sometimes it takes 3 years to learn just a technical job at IBM. Imagine how many years it takes. Watson Sr. didn't. It's one of the things I document in my book is in 1921 he almost drove the company out of the business. He put him close to bankruptcy. But he learned from his mistakes. And I think we have to give that same, we ask the management to forgive our mistakes as employees. I think as employee owners, we look up and should say, look, they're just human beings. We know they're going to make mistakes, and I'll look for a change. Okay,
and you've spoken with thousands of IBMers. What's the sense you get from them about both Palmisano and Rometty?
Palmisano, number one, there's a great, Tom Peters wrote a long time ago, and he said, hey, if you want to find out how you're doing as a CEO, go find out what the latest story about you circulating is. And I think that's a great test. When Luke Gerstner first took over, great stories, right? Doing away with the dress code, the drinking thing, and allowing alcohol, under business conditions, used judiciously. And then the stories changed after, 1999. Sam Palmisano, when you talk to IBMers, it's like a radio station tuning a radio and turning the knob and nobody's broadcasting. There were no stories about him.
Really?
Nobody had an opinion. Nobody saw him. He was invisible to us. Who's Sam? It would be the analysis of most of the IBMers. He's a guy up there doing that financial thing. He's not helping me. And I think that's what shows up in the revenue per employees, right? Because if he was a salesman, revenue per employee should have just shot up during his tenure, and it went down.
Particularly as they cut all those bodies over time.
That's right. I mean, but they cut here and hired 4 there and came out ahead. They took the low-hanging fruit. On Jenny, I'm going to pass because I've talked to different people, and I always try to filter that through who's saying it and under what situations, and I still think she just deserves the benefit of the doubt. One of my big beliefs is that as an employee, I think we owe as much respect to our leaders as they show to us, and that means allowing them to make mistakes. But I would say that Wall Street isn't going to give her much more time, and I don't think IBMers should either, but words won't work. She's going to need to do some actions that really say, I've changed, and I've changed the direction of the company as far as the employees is concerned.
One of the things that, of course, is surprising at a company that's been run by sales guys almost forever is I've heard this, I've read it, I've heard it from you, from Cringely, who's folks don't know, writes a blog, a tech blog, that they've just gutted the sales support, the sales force, the sales leadership, the sales decision-making with clients. They've just gutted all that.
One of the things that nobody talks about is they've actually gone, and they did this a long time ago, and I think it was part of the downfall because there aren't salesmen in IBM anymore. They're basically from development backgrounds all the way up, and they've lost their respect of how hard it is to be a salesman. But one of the things they did is they went to 6-month territories and 6-month quotas. And I can tell you, to sell an IBM product and to build a relationship with a customer, you can't do that in 6 months. You can start off and sell a product, but to understand a customer, and this is where one of the things I like to say is that optimized profits are in customer relationships, not products. And it's the relationships with customers that ultimately drive your bottom line. And those relationships are being lost by salesmen that are turning over. I've seen, back in 2010, 2011, 45% turnover in the sales organization. And customers would say, I don't even know who my salesman is.
Wow.
That is not an organization that's going to optimize profits.
What do you mean by going to, or what's the impact, or what's the logic behind going to 6-month quotas?
It feels like it holds, at the highest level, they feel like they're holding the salesman more accountable. But in reality, they're taking away the ability of the salesman to earn a living. Salesmen need territories that are fixed, especially in an IBM where you're building relationships with some of the largest banks in the world, maybe the smaller mid-range banks. You need a relationship with the customer where you understand their industry. There was a great piece of work done when the mainframe shipped that Bill Simmons wrote a book called The Watson Years. And when they rolled out the mainframe, they completely restructured the sales organization. They implemented training to industry verticals so that when a person walked into a bank, they knew all the problems that bank had and could articulate to them the problems and the solutions from an IBM perspective in the banking industry. They keep talking about rolling out Watson. How much education have they done for the salesmen on Watson and talking about how Watson can help banks, can help insurance, can help, so that all those salesmen out there can go in and articulate the value of what they've got. They're relying on executive relationships, and that will never make a $100 billion corporation grow.
In fact,
makes sense, Jim?
It's a great lead to where I want to go next, which is it's hard for me to totally grasp what the heck the strategy is of this firm. I get the PR, which is analytics, the cloud, Watson. A lot of those are buzzwords. And, there's not a lot of substance. And when they say analytics or the cloud, one of them is growing at, double-digit rates, but it's $2 billion in a $100 billion company. That's delusional. Do you believe that that there is that they have substance behind this as well in those areas? I mean, is it real?
I think they would have had substance if they'd spent $156 billion on the next leading-edge technology for the next century on hardware, software, and services rather than on paper. They don't have the investment. When you go out and you acquire companies, you're acquiring companies that can do things on a shoestring. You go back and study what IBM, what we did with the mainframe. They poured money into things that nobody could compete with. They
bet the company on it.
You got it.
You've just made the exact point that I feel fundamentally that I own IBM stock, and they're doing this roadmap, and the stock's going up, and everybody's saying this is great news. And I consistently said it makes no sense to me because it tells me that IBM's not investing in the future, and I'd rather have them invest in the future. And I don't care about the price today. But it's kind of interesting. What you've just said is exactly, if they'd put that $156 billion over the last 20 years, who knows what the company would be looking for. Now they look like they're desperate to make acquisitions because they got nothing but holes.
Right, we'd have a new generation of computing. I mean, that's the goal with Tom Watson Jr. with the mainframe was to take the whole world and everybody to a new generation of computing. Out of that came the Sabre system for American Airlines. Out of that came every real-time system that you've got today that when you hit enter and gives you a response back, cranking the numbers and telling you instantaneously and what you need. That's, Watson Jr. and betting the company. Is Watson the future? They talk about spending $1 billion on Watson.
Mm-hmm.
If you take that back, it'd be the equivalent of IBM in 1964. Instead of spending $5 billion, spending $20 million. Right? I mean, you kind of have to put the investments in perspective. IBM spends $1 billion every frickin' day on different things. They need somebody that's going to step up, talk to research, talk to development, pull everybody in and say, now we need to go forward. And what are we going to bet the business on? And, what irritates me about the cloud is everybody says IBM missed the cloud. Absolutely they did, but if you think about it, the cloud is basically coming back to IBM's core strengths that it had for 80 years. It's centralization of processing power, it's centralization of storage, it's centralization of networking, it's centralization of security. If IBM had been investing $156 billion in that technology, they would be sitting pretty right now, and they wouldn't be worried.
That's very interesting. And what you're saying is because of the way it's converging back to core competencies or what were core competencies, they still have a chance, right?
Absolutely. They've got the intelligence, they've got the mainframe, they've got the people. Well, they've got the people. They just need them to be engaged, enthusiastic, and passionate.
Let me ask you this now. You had a very interesting piece in Seeking Alpha on Goodwill, that without Goodwill there's actually negative shareholder value, which is pretty stunning.
Yep.
I want you to explain exactly what you mean, because obviously I look at it and I say, well, Goodwill's an accounting term. It's a non-cash term. So why is it such an important thing, or why does it show what you say it shows? So go ahead and talk us through.
Yeah, so how much time do we have, Jim? So I would be sure I kind of keep it
3 minutes, about 3 minutes to go.
3 minutes? Okay. So Goodwill was redefined in 2001, and that's really where all the financial problems come from. Prior to 2001, Goodwill had to be amortized. So if you put $1 million, you had to take so much off every year over a period of time. And I'm not a CPA, so for those Yale MBA guys out there, give me a little bit of good graces here. So when IBM acquires a company, and let's say the company has assets of $1 million, and they pay $2 million, how do you account for that other $1 million? Well, you throw $1 million, onto your balance sheet and say, well, here's an indefinite life, which means I can carry that frickin' thing as long as I want, and it's intangible, which means I can't get any money for it. So, in essence, the way I look at it from a layman's perspective, it's admitting that you overpaid for the company, right? And IBM historically, since Watson Sr. got rid of the initial goodwill that the company came with, has run at less than 3%. Since Gerstner, 2000, it's gone from 1% to over 25%. $30 billion of IBM is now goodwill. And most of the people out there in the technology industry say, hey, we have to have some goodwill. I mean, Apple has, the ability to, has Goodwill around it. But this is just around acquisitions. And the scary part is that because Goodwill comes with acquisitions, there's an incentive for companies to acquire organizations rather than to invest in their own R&D organic growth.
Exactly.
Right, and that's the problem. Is that if you invest $1 in an acquisition on the books, you look a whole lot better than if you invest $1 in raw R&D, and that is setting IBM up. They need to quit that. They need to get back to R&D. They need to set a goal of what's going to take us through to the 22nd century. We're 100 years into our existence, and we need to look into the next 100 years. And they're the one company that can make that kind of a change still. They've got $16 billion a year coming in. They're not going out of business tomorrow. They've got a chance, and I am very optimistic for them. They just need 400,000 people to wake up every day ready to go to work.
Well said, and a good point to end it. And again, that Goodwill is just another example of short-term financial decisions driving everything. And obviously, long-term R&D is something that is the lifeblood of a company. So you'd like to see them get back to that, not just going out and buying shops. Thanks to Peter Greilich. The book, again, is View from Beneath the Elephant, Rediscovering IBM's Corporate Constitution. This has been Business Talk with Jim Campbell, nationally syndicated on the BizTalk Radio Network. A podcast of the 60-minute commercial-free version will be available after we get off the air at Yale Radio, WYBC.com, or search iTunes, Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Now, our next show, we're going to have a speechwriter from President George H.W. Bush, that's 41, on his character and the big events of his administration. Thanks again to Peter. Thanks to our loyal Yale audience for hanging in there. And overtime, see you next Sunday on Business Talk with Jim Campbell.